Madam President, the Senate had three priorities for this week: reauthorizing the expiring provisions of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, passing the second phase of our coronavirus response, and initiating a serious discussion about what else we need to do to help Americans address this challenge. And I have to say I'm glad, Madam President, that we've already made progress on all three fronts. On Sunday, several key provisions of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act expired, including the provision that allows the FBI to wiretap lone wolf terrorists not affiliated with a specific terrorist organization, and the roving wiretap provision that prevents the FBI from having to seek a new wiretap warrant each time a terrorist suspect changes his phone number. Well, Madam President, every minute of every day, the men and women of our law enforcement and intelligence communities are working to track terrorist threats and to prevent attacks on American citizens. We need to ensure that they have all the tools that they need to do their jobs. The Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act provisions that expired Sunday are key weapons in the fight to keep Americans safe. And I'm pleased that we were able to pass a 77-day extension of these provisions yesterday and have set up a process for consideration of a long-term extension. I strongly support the bipartisan House bill, which combines extensions of these key anti-terrorism tools with new accountability measures that will ensure that our law enforcement is held to the highest standards when pursuing surveillance of suspected terrorists and foreign agents. Attorney General Barr has also endorsed the House bill, and I look forward to taking up this legislation and debating several related issues raised by my colleagues before we're on the brink of another expiration. Madam President, of course, the other thing that we're focused on this week is the issue that's at the top of everyone's mind, and that's dealing with the coronavirus outbreak. 2 weeks ago, Congress passed coronavirus legislation providing more than $8 billion in funding for virus research, testing, and medical care. This week, we're looking to pass the second phase of Congress's response, and that's legislation to continue our investment in medical care and to begin to address the economic impact the coronavirus is having on American workers. The House has reached an agreement with Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin, and senators are currently reviewing the House's legislation, which arrived, I might add, here in the Senate just this morning. And I look forward to passing that bill this week. But as the leader said on Sunday, Madam President, Senate Republicans believe that any legislation we pass this week is only the beginning of Congress' response to the virus. As this outbreak continues to unfold, other issues will need to be addressed. And Senate Republicans are already planning for legislation to address future priorities, whether it's increased funding for medical facilities or measures to provide support for American families and businesses. Madam President, this is a challenging time for our country, but it's often in challenging times that we see the very best in America. And we're seeing that already in neighbors ensuring that neighbors are supplied with necessities, in sports figures donating to ensure that workers at their arenas are still paid even when games aren't being played, in restaurants helping to feed their neighbors even though their businesses are currently suffering, in companies and arts organizations acting to provide free resources to families hunkering down at home, in the millions of Americans who are providing the essential services that we need during this outbreak, from the workers stocking the shelves at our grocery stores and pharmacies to the truck drivers delivering needed goods across our country. And finally, and especially, in our healthcare professionals, from doctors and nurses to sanitation staff who risk exposure every day to ensure that Americans receive the care that they need. Madam President, when we've come through this outbreak, all of us want to be able to look back and say that we did everything that we could to help our fellow Americans keep safe and to slow the spread of this disease. And the best way to do that is by following the guidelines that we've been given: washing our hands frequently and thoroughly, practicing social distancing, avoiding large gatherings, and staying home when advised. Some of these measures may be inconvenient, but they're a small price to pay to flatten the curve and limit the disease's spread. While anyone can be hit hard by the coronavirus, there are a lot of people who are especially vulnerable to complications, from elderly Americans to the many individuals with pre-existing conditions. Let's do everything that we can to prevent our fellow Americans and prevent our hospitals and our healthcare professionals from being overwhelmed with cases. Madam President, I'm confident that if we pull together and look out for each other, our nation will emerge from this challenge stronger. And I look forward to working with my colleagues here in Congress to ensure that our nation has the resources it needs to combat and defeat this disease. And Madam President, I was encouraged to hear our Senate Democratic leader speak about his willingness to work with Republicans. Obviously, to do anything here in the Senate requires 60 votes, which means we have to have bipartisan cooperation. We have a vehicle, as I mentioned, a legislative vehicle that contains a number of features that are helpful, I think, in terms of addressing the crisis that we're experiencing, not only on the health care front, but on the economic front and the hardships that are being experienced by millions of Americans. But there's more that we need to do. And those discussions, as I mentioned, are underway. And I'm hopeful that we will be able to come to a conclusion, to a resolution that would be good not only for those Americans who have been hurting economically, perhaps not working, not able to get to work, businesses that have shut down, our small businesses who create most of the jobs in this country, a majority of the jobs in this country, and certainly the healthcare professionals who, as I said, are on the front lines every single day. We need to take every step we possibly can to ensure that that we not only protect people from the spread of the disease, but also that we ensure that they continue to be able to sustain an economic livelihood in the midst of this crisis. And so many of the things that are being discussed and worked on that will require collaboration with the Democrats, with the House of Representatives. We need to approach this in a way, a bipartisan way, recognizing that the need is great and the just absolute necessity of cooperation is greater than ever. So I look forward to working with our colleagues here this week as we move forward in a way that hopefully will lead to some very positive results and address the very critical needs being felt by families all across this country as a result of this coronavirus disease. Madam President, I yield the floor.